Welcome to the Volunteer Nation podcast, bringing you practical tips and big ideas on how to build, grow, and scale volunteer talent. I'm your host, Toby Johnson, and if you rely on volunteers to fuel your charity, cause, membership, or movement, I made this podcast just for you. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Volunteer Nation podcast. I'm your host, Toby Johnson, and I have the treat of having Ms. Breauna Dorelus with me today, who is a guest advisor now at Volunteer Pro at the Impact Lab. And we have so much to talk about. We've been chit-chatting. We tend to get off on tangents. But today we're going to talk about advisory committees. Breauna is, as I said, one of our guest advisors, and she is helping shape the future of volunteer engagement. And I'm not kidding about that. She has got amazing ideas, fresh perspectives, and really keen takes on how to engage communities. And today we're going to focus on a very specific part of community engagement, and that is advisory committees, which many of you may have an advisory committee, and it may not be exactly what you need it to be. We want to make sure those authentic voices, that talent, that knowledge, that wisdom is leveraged through these committees. We don't need a rubber stamp committee. If we are pulling together a rubber stamp committee, it's not worth anybody's time, including your own. So there is so much. I'm a firm believer, and I know Breauna is as well. There is so much deep wisdom in the folks that live in our communities around our nonprofits, and even in our online communities. Let's say you are a remote organization. There are still pockets of people who have gifts to share. So we're going to talk about how to do that. This is part of our Impact Lab POV series, where we are inviting our guest advisors to share their unique point of view. And so we've got Breauna here this week. And Breauna, welcome to the pod.
Woo woo! I'm so excited to be here. Thanks, Toby, for having me again. I think this is the second time
It is.
I had the pleasure of being on here. So
yeah,
ready.
And I was going to mention that Breauna's other interview with me was Volunteer Nation episode 136, getting back to neighboring. And it is a fantastic conversation. I'll link to it in the show notes so you can check that out as well if you want more of Breauna's wisdom, goodness, ideas, and talking straight. You want to check that one out as well. But let me introduce Breauna a minute before we get into the conversation. So Breauna Dorelus is the founder and cause consultant at Connecting Cause, a consultancy dedicated to dismantling harmful volunteer practices implemented by organizations and volunteers specifically towards Black and Brown communities. She started her career as an AmeriCorps member and spent 10 plus years in various volunteer management roles in humanitarian aid efforts, refugee resettlement, and ministry. She believes in community inclusion, and you will see this in all aspects of volunteer process, and has dedicated her work to ensuring that service centers around co-dreaming, not harmful charity, which is such an awesome thing that we need to look at, y'all. This is something that I think gets brushed over quite a bit, and I'm glad you're calling it out for us. In her spare time, she loves playing with dinosaurs and her 5- and 4-year-olds, thrifting, and having a hot matcha latte. So let's talk about advisory communities. And before we do that, folks may have not had a chance to listen to your other interview with me, Breauna. So tell us about yourself, what you do. How did you get into the world of volunteerism? Tell us your birth story when it comes to volunteerism. I know you were an AmeriCorps member, but I have a feeling that it started before that. Am I right?
You are right. You are right. So it's interesting because I am getting this realization in this very moment. The first introduction I had to volunteerism was actually through the mechanism of community first. So let me break that down. So my dad, he is a phenomenal person. And since I was little, he called me half pint. He'd tell me half pint, jump in the truck. We're going to town from a small town, Statesboro, Georgia. And we'd be in town and he'd say, hey, I want you to meet your cousin. This your cousin." And I'd look at them, they'd look at me. We'd say, "Hey, cousin." We'd exchange pleasantries, and I didn't know their name. I didn't know where they came from. I just knew that my dad had basically put his stamp on whatever whoever this person is, that's your cousin. And he did that throughout my entire life as I was
Mm.
there. And so what I didn't realize that he was doing is he was creating a tapestry of care for me that anytime I went somewhere, I would see a cousin and I would feel safe. I would feel connected. If I
Mhm.
needed something, if they needed something, they would recognize me. And from that first interaction to the second, third interaction, it would just develop and grow. And actually, it was through those relationships that I got my first taste of volunteering. Hey, cousin, can you come down the road? I need your help with something. Hey,
Mm.
cousin, can I show up here? I need you to help me with this. Hey, can you carry? And so I was actually volunteering and alongside cousins before I ever entered into a formal organization.
Mhm.
And so that was my first instance of that. Church played also a huge role. Me
Mhm.
being on the junior usher board, me working up in well, in the PowerPoint and like clicking the next slide for the pastor. Like that was a volunteer opportunity. And so all of those mailings, started at a super young age to where I just have this group of cousins that are all around who don't look like me, don't sound like me, and I know that they're safe.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
I can completely relate to that. My mom, on my mom's side, she grew up with 10, there were 10 kids, and my grandmother in this tiny house in Bremerton, Washington, dirt poor. I mean, they didn't have any money at all.
Mm.
Everybody was working. As the older kids got older, they helped the family out. And my grandmother was known as a person who would feed the neighborhood.
Mm.
So she would make fry bread, she would make pots of whatever, and anybody was welcome always
Wow.
to the house. So they were already poor and they gave away what they had. And I remember I met this guy, Gene, when I was probably in my 20s. And my mom said, "This is our brother, Gene." And I go, "What do you mean? You have another brother? There's only 10 of you. We all know y'all's names start with D. I can name them out: Delphine, Deanna, Dwight, Dixie. I can name them all out." But I said, "Gene doesn't start with a D." And she said, "Oh, no, but we adopted him." And
Mm.
they didn't formally adopt him. But when he was a teenager, he ran into trouble, didn't have a place to live. And in their tiny little house, they brought him in, and he was their brother and considered their brother. So
Wow.
I learned that from the deep connection community. I mean, we've characterized it, or we've pigeonholed it as quote unquote informal volunteering. You and I've talked about neighboring in our last
Yeah.
call. This is about neighboring, but it's also just about how you were raised
Mhm.
as integral. And when my husband and I got married, he's like, "I do not understand why we need to have so many people at this wedding." I mean, we got married in midlife. We got married in our mid-40s. We were not
Wow.
youngins. He's like, "You're not a 20-year-old. You don't need a big old wedding." And I go, "No, you don't understand. I don't know where to cut off. Is it my cousin? Is it my cousin's child that I
Yes.
say no to? Is it my second cousin?" Like that's not how we do. And I go, "You're going to have to get used to this because this is not how we do. Everyone is welcome always."
Mm.
So I totally get it.
So good.
You've been born and bred as a person who lives in community, and it's not even, now we're having this conversation. It's not even like apparent to you. It's just how you do.
Yeah, I was today years old when I was like, "Wait a second." It wasn't even
Mhm.
a formal place. It
Mhm.
was it was volunteering, quote unquote, through
Mhm.
those relationships. So look at me.
Yeah.
I'm so glad I'm here now. So I'm able to have that realization
I know.
on the
It's like,
podcast.
I know. Just gratitude to our legends of our families.
Mhm.
Let's talk about volunteerism for a minute and community engagement. Let's just talk about community engagement since we're talking about advisory committees. Why do you think engaging the community? I often ask our guests about, why do you think volunteerism is important? Let's talk about why you think maybe community engagement. Why should nonprofit organizations engage the community
Mm.
nowadays, in particular, at this point in history?
Mm.
If you could break it down.
Yeah. We have traditionally, as nonprofit professionals, whether we intended to or not, we have pigeonholed community as the end user for a volunteer experience.
Mm,
And so what we have done is the community exists for the learning, growth, feel good fulfillment of the volunteer themselves. And
mhm,
so oftentimes what we tend to do is because they are that end user, and they are the ones that are on the receiving end. And based on the fact that we are called volunteer managers, volunteer directors, so our
mm,
goal is to manage and direct volunteers, we rarely get the support, resources, wherewithal, and innovative thinking to say, wait a second, we're giving surveys to how was your experience to volunteers. We're asking them, we're giving them focus groups. What about the folks that we're actually here for in the first place? And
mm,
so community in itself, and let me say this, when I say community is not a monolith. There are so many different people, places, diversities in that. But for the sake of this conversation, we're going to blanket as communities, those being served, who are the recipients of the service. So oftentimes we get to a point where they are there for the fulfillment of the mission versus them being the mission themselves. And
mm,
so because of that, and particularly in this point in time, we are craving connection. We are craving the capacity to be in relationship. We know about the statistics about loneliness. We know about the effects of social media and what it's having. We also know what happens when we get to have just a really impromptu, fulfilling conversation with someone and what that does. And so now, I think particularly in this day and age, nonprofits should not see themselves as a service provider but a part of the ecosystem of
mm,
care in which
mm,
they're entrenched in the responsibility of facilitating relationships. And so embracing that, like I'm connecting someone to not a service opportunity. Sometimes I'm not even connecting someone to a cause. But what does it look like to create the environment where I'm connecting someone to a relationship with someone else that changes their perception about the other, right?
mm,
And
mm,
that's why it's critical now more than ever because of the polarization,
mm,
because of people there being this word, oh, if you say this word, you're on this side. If you say this
mm,
word, you're on that side. But volunteerism can be that equalizer and can serve as that equalizer if nonprofits take that opportunity to do that.
yeah. I love this idea of a nonprofit identity as a convener, as a community convener, because there's a
Yeah.
privileged spot, there's a privileged place that nonprofits take space in communities, I'm just going to say this, whether the community asks for it or not. Somebody
Well,
inspired founder or group of people. Sometimes it's people from the community. Sometimes it's outsiders that come in and say, we see this problem. We want to help fix it. That's usually the way it goes.
yep.
And rather than seeing your organization as a problem fixer, but as a convener of, of talent and wisdom that can work together towards a solution is a whole different, I worked 25 years in nonprofits before I started my consulting practice in everything from senior services to youth employment to arts and culture to you name it, mostly direct service, but some grassroots organizing and some more advocacy based. But even so, it was that perspective of we're here to fix problems. We get funding to fix problems. And this is, and we were fixing problems in a lot of respects. But like you say, with connecting the cause, sometimes harm was done as well. So I feel like seeing yourself as a convener can prevent, if you bring that wisdom to the table early on, it can prevent harm later.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think there's such a when you said, being able to bring that in early, I think that is so critical to hear for these, nonprofit organizations who are 2 years in, 5 years in, 10 years in. There are organizations, I was just having this conversation the other day, that they're celebrating like their 100th year anniversary, or they are celebrating, 75 years still working on the mission. And it's very interesting to me listening and hearing volunteer engagers and how they feel so constrained because of tradition and hierarchy. And it's always been done this way. Not to mention, I'm not even mentioning the ones who have been within the organization for a long time. What about these bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, ready to explore, ready to innovate folks? And they come into a 75-year, 100-year organization, and they're like, here, everything's already laid out for you. This is how we interact with each other. This is how we interact with community.
Yes.
And so I think there's a real responsibility, and you and, so many others talk about taking back our power and talking about making the case for volunteer engagement in the C-suite and, making sure that there is a responsibility there as well. So I do want to navigate that there is a tension of what do you do when you see harm happening, or when you see that there's a spark of some change here, but there's so much red tape and so much hierarchy. And that's a whole, of course, different podcast to navigate, but there is that tension.
Yeah. It's given me an idea. I got some light bulbs going off on a project that I might take on, which is a volunteer engagement strategy. And I'm thinking, where should we go? Straight into the community to ask about this volunteer engagement strategy and what it should look like. Not with staff. Well, with staff, obviously, but come on. Into the community where ideas are going to come that don't come in the, hermetically sealed environment.
That's
you know what I'm saying? There's
That's
stuff
right.
out there. There's ideas out there. There's a different perspective out there. Ooh, this is good. All right. Well, this really rolls well into our talk about advisory committees. And, you've already started to share your perspective, and you have a really strong, I think, perspective and very unique in a lot of ways from what I hear out there in the world. So, but what belief, let's get into advisory committees. What belief do you hold about advisory committees that most people in this field tend to get wrong? We talked about the fact that you and I have we have a clear understanding, or we have a value set. I would say a part of our value set is that there is power in community. There is knowledge, wisdom in many communities, and deep knowledge and wisdom that may not be quote unquote textbook, But what other belief do you that other people tend to get wrong in advisory committee engagement?
Number one, I think there is a there's an overcorrection in let's focus on the advise. They just advise. So there is, when you only advise and you're not like a consultant, right? Or you're not in, that type of role, what ends up happening is advising becomes extraction, because there's only we want to know what you think, but we don't want your input on how to implement it, or if we should be implementing it versus you all creating spaces to implement and follow through. So I think that there is in itself, the word itself of an advisory committee, if you keep it to the definition of just advising,
right,
there is a moment there where you're still holding power in 75% of the process, and you're just the first 25% is the let's get people in a room to have a conversation. So that's one I
Mhm.
think is really important. And then this a second piece that I rarely see, if ever, is reaching back out and saying, number one, this is what you all said. I want to clarify, is this what you meant when you said this?
Mm.
Right?
Mhm.
So there's a difference between we're gathering surveys or we're gathering notes or we're having a conversation or a meeting. It's another thing to regurgitate and communicate that same information and say, is this what I heard you say? Right. And so then there's also a different piece of it's not just hoarding what you say, but what are some solutions that are coming from you? Because right there in that moment, we take the notes, we take the information, and then we can still say, this is what you said. And then we run off in the sunset and we go back to our staff and we create the solutions, right?
Yes.
And we
Yes.
create the solutions based on our organizational goals, our strategic plan, our key performance indicators. And and then after that, is it even the advisory committees after that?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I love this checking back because it also can unveil and unearth bias. Obviously, we all have bias of some kind. So when
Yes.
we're hearing feedback, we may be making assumptions about what's behind that feedback or the words that are being used where, our brains are making those words into different thoughts, different patterns, and different understandings. So I like the checking back and synthesizing actually, the community's input. I also like the other thing I think people miss sometimes is the reporting back at some point. Like
Absolutely.
we heard you, we made the change because you said you wanted this change because you didn't like how this is going. We want to let you know that this finally happened. It may be a year later.
Yes,
Sometimes it takes a long
it
time.
does.
And even though in our hearts and minds we want to get it done overnight, it can't. Sometimes it works that way. I would go back to my volunteers even and just say, I know y'all were grumpy about this. Guess what? We finally fixed it. We finally solved it. But there's a difference even then of solving for you
Yes,
or solving with you.
absolutely. There is a real balance and rhythm of intentionality when it comes to participation, right?
Mm, mm,
And there are so many instances where participation isn't considered and then it's dropped off. Whether what I've already mentioned around, not clarifying, whether it's the piece where folks go off and make solutions on their own, whether it's the reporting back, whether it's having a follow up conversation of how did you feel about this advisory committee and what would take this to the next level, right? Like,
yeah,
what did you see? Were there places where honor or dignity was not present, right?
yeah.
And there's a co-building, together. I think we back all the way up, right? And the question that you had mentioned earlier is what people miss is the makeup of the advisory committee themselves and
Mm,
actually who's on it. And
mm-hmm,
I think that is something that's critical.
mm-hmm.
Different perspectives that are all working towards the same goal and same mission is so critical. I've been working with an advisory committee, and there is staff in the advisory committee. There are those who are clients of the organization. There are those who wear multiple hats and they're actually community leaders, and all of them are working towards and looking at the volunteer engagement practices and policies from
Mm-hmm.
those different perspectives. Now, one group or one particular person that I would have loved to have is a funder or
Mm-hmm.
someone who is, connected from a donor perspective. And
Mm-hmm.
but we're still working on it. But having those diverse voices in the room that can talk from different spaces and create that dynamic, I think is really important too.
Yeah. Yeah. When I do uh program, design work with folk, I will recommend at the beginning, hey, let's put together an advisory group of volunteers and
Mhm.
staff so that we have some honest feedback on what we're doing. We're not designing in a bubble. And it does a lot of things for you. It's change management as well, you know? You're gonna have more wisdom. You're gonna make better decisions for sure.
Yes.
You're also gonna build some community capital that wasn't there before, and you're gonna bake in buy-in because folks feel like they've been heard and they had a say in what impacts them, and they're gonna be champions for the rollout. It's a
Yes.
win-win-win. I'm
This
telling you, I don't
really is.
like, we can say, do you wanna do something performative and just say, "I ticked the box and I got some ideas." I pick people's brains. I mean, I get this all the time. "Hey, can I get a call with you and pick your brain?" How exploitative does that feel?
Right.
Like, I wanna just extract knowledge from you, your 35 plus years in the field. It's not. If you wanna get on my bad side, ask me to pick my brain,
Yeah.
you know? Like,
Right.
please do not extract,
Mhm.
It's offensive. Okay, I know I was really strong on that. People are like, "Whoa,
No, and
where'd
it's
she come
true,
from?" I was
and it's
really
true,
strong on that.
and I
Sorry, I'm
agree.
just speaking my truth. Anyway, so there's this continuum. Of course, there's a continuum. You can be totally performative, or you can have a full on, like you're trying to get to the full on, which is getting a funder. Maybe somebody's part of a donor advised fund, or part of a local community foundation, or part of a giving circle, or somebody who has access to funds, who has a point of view. How did you get to this point, Breauna? I mean, you didn't just come out of like you didn't just come you started in AmeriCorps. You didn't just come out like, I have a fully fleshed out theory of how change happens in communities, and I'm going to bring, when you think about advisory committees, you know what has changed? Do you remember any points in time where you've changed your mind about,
Mm,
like, oh, I'm going to do this differently? Or
yes, plenty. Let me
okay.
let me just pick one. I'm like,
Okay.
let me. Yeah, there's been a lot of oh, okay, I can name one very specifically. I was working in refugee resettlement, and I wanted to create an advisory council. I don't even know if I called it that then. It's like, I just want a group of people together to talk about these things. It was super, super flexible. And one of the things that I realized that made me want to do it differently was when we got together, there were some power dynamics that came to the room
Mm,
that I needed to be aware of.
mm,
And because I wasn't keen in being aware of them, we were not able to do what we said we were going to do because there was some repair that was needed. There were some staff members that were on the advisory committee, and they themselves were powering over the conversations. It was a very organizational forward topics, and I could sort of kind of see community members and you could just see the diminishing feeling of like that dignity being stripped away, sort of kind of in that space. Their dignity themselves wasn't stripped away, but we were creating spaces where they did not feel dignity in that space. And in that moment, I was like, I can't play around with this stuff.
mm-hmm,
Like, I can't be throwing spaghetti at a wall to see what sticks. Can I do that with an Excel document?
mm-hmm,
Sure. Can I do that with, what to use? Do I use sticky notes for this, or do I use a notebook? You know what I'm saying? Like,
mm-hmm,
yeah, I can just throw, but when it comes to people
mm-hmm.
and trauma and decision making and power, you gotta pause, Breauna, and not get into this space of urgency, and you
Mm,
start to bulldoze. And so in that moment, I was like, you
mm,
know what? We can't do this. We have
mm,
to actually dismantle. I went to the community members and I apologized for the ways that I did not call things out as I
mm-hmm,
should have.
mm-hmm,
Also, there's so many dynamics, right? Me also being a Black woman earlier on in my career,
mm,
staff members are in it who are white, who are also tenured. Like,
mm,
there's a lot of
mm,
like
mm.
dynamics that I'm navigating on my own and my own identity, personally and professionally. And in that happening, I'm also creating harm and spaces where people aren't feeling cared for because I got the understanding from my growing up of community, right? We got to all come together and we got to all get together and do this thing
Sure.
together. But the mechanisms by which we do it are the pieces that need to be more intentional.
Yeah, absolutely. Could not agree more. I have had those strange dynamics and crazy spots. And you do, as a person who really cares about community, you do take it, personally. And as, I feel like early in my career, many mistakes made, many mistakes made. And, it helps us be who we are today.
Yes.
But yeah, the dynamic and the person, you are on the front foot. You are the person, you are representing
Yes.
your organization, yourself, etc. And, it's a tough spot to be in. I feel like if folks are gonna, I never thought about this before, but I'm thinking about it now, that you need to have your self-care plan going. You cannot, like you said, be intentional about your own
Yes.
self-care as well, because if you're like, you're probably like me, like my therapist used to say, your screen on your screen door is way too wide. You got to tighten it up.
Mm.
Too much is getting through to the heart. You got to tighten that up a little bit. And I like, oh yeah, I guess I do. So people who feel the room, who feel the dynamics in the room, if you're that kind of listeners, if you're that kind of person, you're going to feel all the dynamics deeply around the room of all the folk. It makes you really good at identifying, like, right away where there's conflict, where there's problems, I can be in a room of 100 people and I can feel vibes and I
Yes.
know where to go and like figure it out. So if you're that person, you need to have a self-care plan too, of like, how are you going to decompress? How are you going to, where's your support coming from? Who are you going to talk to when there's something that you're struggling with? And if you don't have your organization's support or your supervisor's support, you're out there in the cold. you know?
Yeah.
So
So
there has
good.
to be like a self-care plan. I mean, that would be what I learned. Why do you think advisory committees are important for organizations to focus on right now? What might they be missing if they do it wrong, and what might it look like? I know this is three questions altogether, but what might it look like if they did it right? So why is it important? What might, what might it look
Mhm.
like if they don't get it right? But I mean, we've kind of talked about what it might look like, but what could it look like if it's done well? Maybe
Yeah.
let's focus on that.
It's important because continue in I mean, in this space, we continue to be our own yes person. Like we
Mm,
continue
mm,
to say, this has worked in the past, so we don't need it to do it again. Oftentimes we say that it's worked in the past and we don't need to do it again because we are sometimes we're not open to the exploration. Sometimes we don't have time
mhm,
to want to change something different. The years go by very quickly and we're just like, oh, that's another thing that's coming. It's the annual thing. Yeah, let's just keep it like it is and let's keep moving forward, right? We continue to be our own yes person. We continue to be our own cheerleaders in silos.
mhm,
We continue to make decisions where we continue to hoard power
mm,
and gain more power. We're not asking the question, how can I gain more power? That's not what we're doing because we're asking questions like scale,
mm,
impact,
mhm,
more hours, more
mhm,
reach, more clients. When we're asking those questions, then we start tiptoeing into the power consumption and decision making that makes us, oh, if we want to scale more, then we need to have this, and this. When really now is important to go deeper, not to
mm,
go further. How do
mm,
we go deeper?
mm,
How do we fortify? How do we it's important because nonprofits themselves are becoming these consumers
mm,
and we're getting and we're feasting on more when it's like, wait a second, do we need to scale down?
mm,
If we have 7 programs and we do that 60% well for each, can we have 4 programs and go deeper in community and reset and get those things done exceptionally,
mhm,
right?
mhm,
So that is why it's important to have outside people that care about the cause. Now, let me say this too. sorry, this is a little bit of a tangent. We're not looking for fans of your organization.
Mhm.
We're looking for people who are connected to a cause that matters to them,
Mhm.
right? So when we are connecting people like that on an advisory council, that's important because there's an accountability to the cause, right? And
Mhm.
an accountability to the actual issue and to the solutions and not what's best for the organization.
Mhm.
And so that's why it's important when we get it right. Wow. When we get when we get it right, we start to see a shift in, like we said earlier, that convener piece.
Mhm.
We start to see a shift in the questions that are asked
Mhm.
by the organization. We start to say first, well, did we run this by the advisory committee? Did we run this by the council? Like, those are our people. Those are our partners, right? And then we're able to move. What we get to a point is that if you solve for the issue, then your organization that's connected to the issue it's going to flourish regardless,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
Because we are bringing it up with the issue itself, and let's get connected to the people who care the closest about it. And so
Mhm.
when we get it done right, we stop becoming service providers and we start becoming partners with the community. They stop seeing us as just an organization in the community and they
Mm.
start seeing us a part of their ecosystem.
Mhm.
I can actually go to a trusted source here and they're no BS,
Mhm.
and I can rely on them and I can connect with them. And so also we get it when it happens right, we pay them.
Mm. Mm. Mhm.
We Northwest Harvest, who I am currently working with, who has an advisory committee, the hours that those volunteers put in from the community who are on the advisory committee, they are getting paid for their expertise.
Mhm.
Like that's also what happens, when we get it right. I'll stop there.
I love it. I love it. I love it. We are having such a great conversation. Also, it makes me think that, there's places for, as you said, like community and all design work. It also makes me think, why is this going on? Why have nonprofits become, because I've been in the field for a long time. I mean, I started working in nonprofits in like, the early 1980s. I mean, this is a long time ago, y'all. Like, even before I went to college, I was doing some intern work. And so I have a lot of, time under my belt. And I think about, the times when things get tough nationally.
Yeah.
I've been part of times like these when funding just the rug gets pulled out and folks are left scrambling. This isn't the first time this has gone
Yeah.
on. And it isn't the first time that the sector's under attack and all of that. This is not the
Yeah.
first time at all. And when there's, and when there's tough times economically for communities, the nonprofit sector becomes more and more of the safety net and expected to do more with less, more with less, more with less,
Yeah.
which, it's like a boundaries, when you say go deep versus go wide, there's some speed of trust that happens. So because if you're deep and you're working in community and community is really advising you and driving, really driving the train in a lot of ways, clients are referred to you, the right clients are referred to you. If you're doing direct
Yes.
service, the volunteers are out there, the funders who care about that, they're coming. As you said, the thriving happens, but it
Yeah.
happens because there's strong social capital and community capital. But the more organizations try to fill in the gaps of that safety net that's been abandoned by, some of our government funding and government agencies,
Yes.
the more people stretch themselves thin to try to take it up, the more that we're relied on to do that.
Yes.
So it's sort of like with volunteer managers, I'm always telling them, like, no, do not do more with less. That is actually, it's not possible to
Mm,
clone yourself. It's not possible. Yes, you can improve your productivity slightly. You can create automations. You can get better at managing your time. but you can't clone yourself. And so to stretch yourself too thin and burn yourself out because people want you to do more with less, it's time to say no to that
Yeah.
and ask people to do the hard work of prioritizing.
Mm.
And similarly, I feel like on a macro level, the sector, and we care about people in our communities. We don't want to see people without food, without
Right.
shelter, without. But the more we absorb and try to stretch ourselves as thin as possible, instead of going deep and really fully serving the people that we're here to serve, that we are creating the, conditions for our own demise. Because there's a point where it breaks,
Yeah.
And so it's interesting to think about that dynamic as we think about, engaging community. Just when you were talking about that, I thought, this is happening on a macro level.
As you were talking, it's something that I've communicated before, that it's coming back to me. When we talk about the systems gaps, when we talk about healthcare system, education system, criminal punishment system, these systems that were originally created, of course, did not have everyone thriving in mind, right? And so in pops in nonprofits, in pops in CSR, to come in and fill that gap. And unfortunately, to your point, the nonprofit sector has become a system itself that is also creating the same things and regurgitating the same things that it's trying to avoid. So, but what we're doing is a different kind of gap. We're filling the needs gap, but we are widening the gap when it comes to community inclusion. We are widening the gap when it comes to decision making and autonomy, dignity, honor, relationship. I think in some ways. Now let me say this: are we the best at it? When we think about the big scheme of things and systems, are we best at building relationship? Are we best at connecting people? Absolutely, because we are the nonprofit sector. And like I say all the time, it is okay to interrogate the good. We are still creating gaps. As we fill gaps, we are creating gaps. As we are connecting, people to nonprofits and causes and relationships, there are still mechanisms that we are also doing to disrupt that. And so I think that there is just this real piece of, are we doing great? Yes, we are doing great things. And it's National Volunteer Week that we're doing this, right? Like, we're doing great things. And how can we ensure that that gap gets tighter and tighter and tighter and tighter as we are doing good work?
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, let's take a quick break. And then after, we're going to talk a little bit about ways people can learn more from you about how to develop advisory committees that are equitable, that bring people's wisdom to the table, that narrow the gap, and that help us go deep. These are all good things to have. So we'll be right back after this break with our chat with Breauna Dorelus on developing advisory committees. Don't go anywhere. Breauna and I are getting deep today, as we tend to do.
Right.
As we tend to do. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Hey friends, have you ever felt overwhelmed and unable to focus on the right things at the right time? Maybe you're not even sure where to put your time and energy to get the most traction with your volunteer program. Well, guess what? We've got a tool that can help you. It's called the Volunteer Strategy Scorecard. In about 3 minutes, you can get a PDF report that helps you understand where your gaps are, where you can focus energy to get big traction, and what your maturity levels are across 5 domains of volunteer engagement. It's a super cool tool. It's taken us a while to get it out, so I'm really excited it's finally found its way into the world. I hope you'll check it out. Just click on the link inside the show notes or in the link in the comments below and get started. Again, it only takes 3 minutes, and then you can get a lot of clarity on your next steps. Okay, we're back with our discussion with Breauna Dorelus on how to develop advisory committees, and we're talking, we're solving the world's problems right now. Not really. Or we're calling them out is more like it. I would never claim I could solve the world's
Right,
problems.
right.
Well, that's not going to happen. Anyway, we've talked about thinking about developing more, empowered advisory committees by really going deep in volunteer engagement. You've given us some ideas about what success might look like. Can you share an example from your work with your own work or work with a client where some small change in community engagement made a big impact? And in the way that you were working with advisory committees, is there something small that might be, we were talking before the world's problems, and yes, and the sector and the challenges of the sector and the challenges of all those things. But there's also I think we also need to recognize that there are small
Yeah.
steps people can take that can have a big impact.
One of the things that was small but was significant is that specifically, and I'll share a recent at Northwest Harvest. Shout out to Jonna and Josette. They are part of the volunteer team there. We created position descriptions for the advisory council, and it was not a blanket position description for every single person. We actually created one specifically for the role or identity that that person holds in the community.
Mm.
And so that was incredibly helpful because, for instance, in the staff description, one of the lines was, you're going to be in conversation with community members. You hold a title at Northwest Harvest. Please be aware of how much you speak and how you speak when it comes to, these particular meetings, to make sure community members are occupying most of the time. Like, we had that in the description.
Mm.
In the description of the community leaders, and we specifically communicated, like, bring your whole self, and you will have the floor and being able to communicate. You will not be retaliated against if you say something that is not in alignment with what you think the organization would say. These are the type of orientations that we're having with them. And I think that that was incredibly important. Also, with the staff, we did a little extra step, and when we were recruiting staff for this, it wasn't a mandatory, thing. It was, if you want to be a part of this and it's going to be specifically around volunteer engagement practices, we want you to be a part. We also had a follow-up conversation after the position description was sent out to go over any qualms, thoughts, or feelings towards them being a staff member in that particular type of space, and the power dynamics, or what that would mean for their role, for their job. Because, and I've seen in other advisory councils, what will happen is a staff member would be in there and it would be a little bit of, but we do that. Or, but there's a defensiveness that comes out,
Yes.
and it's like, and we're trying to like stop that in its tracks before it actually gets there. Of course, everybody is human. There were times like I had to redirect, or I had to, with these meetings, but we are the small step of a specific description that also communicates the behavior in which you come into a place, versus this is how many hours, this is how much you get paid, this is the mission of this, but behaviorally, this is how we want you to enter into this space, and we did it differently for each person. That was a small shift that created like just the foundation for big impact.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that there are a couple things about what you just said. One is like curating the group, curating the right people in the room. So there's that, right?
Yes.
Like curating. And then as you're curating, understanding and analyzing where those folks might be coming from.
Yeah.
Creating position descriptions that are behavior based, but also focus on mindset.
Yeah.
And grounding. So you really it's a grounding exercise almost, that the position description is functioning as partly grounding, right? It's almost like norms, but individualized norms, right? Because usually I'll be up in the room and I'll say, all right, here's each, like step up, step back, problems, let's talk about possibilities, not problem, and then I'll go, who wants to add more? But you're actually doing norms for based on their, where they're coming from, absolutely. And absolutely, I've seen myself do that. Yeah, but, like,
Me
and,
too.
early in my career would put the fear of God in me if people started critiquing, I'd be like, I'd start sweating. My hands would start sweating, and it's like, but nobody is hurting you right now.
Yeah.
Just lean into it. Just say, yeah, tell me more. I'm curious. Curiosity is a great leveler.
Yes.
It's a great leveler. When you really do honestly want to know, you will learn something. And, even if you make mistakes, it's okay. I've had like
Yeah.
some hard conversation, people who've called me out for mistakes. It's okay. In fact, sometimes those relationships become the strongest when someone calls you out on something and you hear it and you try to fix it on your side. You don't ask the other person to try to fix it for you. You say, tell me more. And then you go, okay, I didn't see that. That's a blind spot for me. All right, let me see what I can do, and then check back. Hey,
Yes.
how are you seeing it now? Is it changed? I want to know. I'm curious.
Yeah.
I mean, there is so much goodwill that people will give to you if you are just curious and earnest.
Yeah.
I mean,
Absolutely.
and defensiveness never, that energy just bounces people back. You want to get closer to people, not farther away when this
Yes.
stuff goes down.
And that's
So,
why so much of this as well. And that's why it's sort of kind of different in the nonprofit space because uh, we are told to bring our whole selves. We are
mhm.
told that this is a family, or a staff, a
Yeah.
family. We are told that, I mean, we lead altruistically with our hearts because we are connected to these things. So there's a real balance of like looking at community feedback as a gift
Yeah.
or looking at, an accountability as a rhythm of community. It's a rhythm to be
Mm.
able to be account, just like it's a rhythm that you experience joy in a community, accountability in community, feedback in a community, a conflict. All of these should be looked at as gifts and as opportunities. And oftentimes, because we are either so connected to a particular cause or connected to the hierarchy of our title, or
Yeah.
I'm getting bashed over here by this staff member or by this boss. I'd be darned if I'm gonna get bashed by you who I'm trying to serve or who I'm trying to help.
Yeah.
And so
Yep.
it's a real, we have to really, when you talked about self-care earlier, self-care is such a critical piece of even this conversation at this point, because it's like, how am I regulating my own self in community? Right. So
Mhm.
that so that myself doesn't show up as defensive, or I don't show up as,
Yes.
it takes that self-care,
This is
you
striking out
know.
so intensely right now.
No.
It totally is. No.
You need
No,
that
there
too. That's self-care too.
yeah, I mean, I have a husband who will tell me when I am not, like this morning. He said, you're being really told me you are being, you're really grumpy about this one thing, like stop treating people like they're coming at you all the time, and I was like, yeah, but I'm doing that. And then I started really thinking about it and I go, oh, I'm doing that because I'm tired. I'm doing this because I'm tired.
Mm.
I got to rest. I got to do some, recouping, I got to do a little more self-care. I can't, the self-regulation isn't working right now.
Mm-mm.
So all right, we have traveled a lot of ground. We have come a long way in this journey, in this conversation. So, for someone who knows that, let's say they have an advisory committee or they had planned or are planning on forming one, and they feel overwhelmed by the thought of either making a change, maybe it's a legacy committee that they, there's so many of these, right? Or they feel overwhelmed about the thought of like, oh no, I don't have bandwidth for that. I do not have bandwidth for what they're talking about. If they feel overwhelmed, where should they begin? What's your best recommendation for folk?
Yeah. Relationship.
Mm,
So if you can't be in a position right now where you don't have the bandwidth or the capacity to create a formal advisory committee, you
mm,
create one for yourself.
mm.
So you have a rhythm on your calendar where you are connecting with folks outside of your norm, the folks who are on the receiving end, the folks who are staff that you don't really talk to like that, but they care about volunteerism. You create your own advisory committee. And they help you. And let me say this, the basis is the relationship, is not the extraction of I want to be in community with you so that you can help me with this document, right? It is all of the well-being of this is tied up in all of us. And I do not want to be the hero and do it on my own, nor should I do this on my own. So I want to grab and get folks who can pour into this, who can pour into me, and I can share my perspective with them. And you get about 3 folks and you have a rhythm on your calendar, whether you're meeting with them every 2 weeks, meeting with them once a month. And if it's a community member, if it's a grandma down the street, and you sit at their feet and you have that coffee and you bring that tea and you have that conversation, right? Or it may be a colleague that's in a different state and they get it, right? And they understand what you're trying to do. And they're also in food banking, or they're also in hospice, right? And you are having regular conversations with them, and you are sharing your documents or sharing your practices, right? And so I would advise a colleague and a community member, right?
Yeah.
Start small, get those people and build that relationship.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Perfect advice. And I did put a link in the show notes when I start thinking about this. I put it earlier when I was talking about setting boundaries. That's the other thing I would recommend for folk. Set some boundaries. If you feel like this is a high priority for you, then you got to set boundaries around other things. So I've got a podcast episode called, it's episode 126, 8 Ways to Empower, Not Rescue Nonprofit Employees and Volunteers. And when I say not rescuing, it means about setting boundaries. So if you're feeling like, you need the space and time to be able to do what Breauna is recommending, with the just starting small, that's all about boundary setting with folk. We can't be completely depleted all the time, and I realized my husband was coming at me this morning, give me critique. I was like, oh, it's because I'm not setting my boundaries properly.
Listen, I've made it clear what we are not about to do. We are not about to give all the love and care and capacity to community when we're not taking care of self-community here.
Yeah.
Then what is it for? You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, then what is it for? That's even another own level of saviorism that we are doing, in that space. So it's like I am depleted so much, but I keep giving and keep giving and keep giving. That's setting a precedent for community. That's setting a precedent for your family. That's setting a precedent for yourself. And Breauna Dorelus, Toby said not today. Like we are not. That's why we are not trying to boil the whole ocean. If you need to take you a pot and get some water out and work with that, cook with that. If you need a ladle and that's all you can handle right now. If you need a teaspoon to make a slight change, you know what I mean?
Yep.
Assess your capacity.
Yep. Absolutely. I needed to hear this today. Okay. In your upcoming Impact Lab Advanced Seminar, co-creating advisory committees that actually lead, it's happening on June 2nd. What will you help people do differently? I'm sure a lot of what we talked about today, who would benefit? What are you going to help people do differently, and who will benefit most from attending this? And gang, if you're interested in joining us, all you have to do is join the Impact Lab. And if you can't join us live, June 2nd may not be the best day for you. That's okay, because we post the replay recordings. Breauna's going to have an exceptional training to offer. We're going to have a start guide so you can implement exactly what you're learning and take it and run with it. But Breauna, tell us a little bit. What will people learn how to do differently, and who would best benefit for this?
Yeah, that's great. So one of the main things I'm thinking of right now is doing differently is having the participation of the committee all the way through. So there's so many times, like we said earlier, where we drop off at certain occasions. I'm going to identify where those drop-offs occur and how to not have that happen, right? And that's from a personal perspective. That's from a leadership perspective, because we have these moments of like, okay, I think I got what I need. Okay, I think I got what I need. And we're like, no, as soon as you say, I think I got what I need, that's when the next step is supposed to occur within community. So that's definitely one of those things. And what was the second question? I went into...
I know I keep throwing them at you.
No, that's okay.
Who would benefit most from joining us in this training on June 2nd?
Is it really cliche to say everybody? Is that really bad to say everybody?
Yes.
There are the people that everybody needs to be here. Yes. And the specific who really needs to be in here are people who are ready to take their community engagement to the next level, or they already have advisory committees and something's just not there's something that you feel that's missing and you don't know what's missing. That's definitely another group of people that need to be in there for sure.
Excellent. Excellent. Breauna, thank you. So insightful.
This has been
great.
Just
a fun conversation as always.
Yeah.
Light bulbs are going off. I'm going to walk away with a deeper insight, more than one, I think. Appreciate that. Thank you for that. And thank you to you all for listening. This is the place we try to do this thing. We try to challenge you to think a little bit differently and try to approach things in an authentic way, in a way that brings people together, that creates space, levels the playing field a little. That's what we try to do here. So, Breauna, thank you for helping us do that today. And gang, if you enjoyed the Volunteer Pro Impact Lab, I'm reading my notes and I'm like, yeah, I forgot. We already promoted the Volunteer Pro Impact Lab. I think it's a great place for intermediate to advanced practitioners. If you're brand new to volunteer management, I really recommend our Volunteer Management Fundamentals course, so you can get a firm grounding first before you go into some of these more advanced techniques. But of course, all of the principles that we learned today and that you learned could be helpful even when you're just starting out. So if you enjoyed this episode of the Volunteer Nation podcast, I hope you'll share it with a friend or a colleague, somebody who could also benefit from the conversation. I hope you'll give us a rating and review. 5 stars. We like it. Why? Because it gets us seen by more people who can use the intense and wonderful knowledge of our guests. And I hope you'll join us next week. Same time, same place on the Volunteer Nation. Take care, everybody. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Volunteer Nation podcast. If you enjoyed it, please be sure to subscribe, rate, and review so that we can reach more people like you who want to improve the impact of their good cause. For more tips and notes from the show, check us out at tobyjohnson.com. We'll see you next week for another installment of Volunteer Nation.